Her roof tore apart after a terrible storm until 50 bikers showed up. What happened next left her speechless. The howl of the wind was a scream, not a whistle. It tore at the clapboards of the old house, and beneath the drumming rain an unfamiliar sound began, a steady, low-frequency rumble. It wasn't the storm. It was an engine, or maybe five, pushing hard against the downpour. They appeared first as headlights, twin yellow eyes cutting through the deluge, too low and too numerous for any normal traffic. Then came the shape, bulky and black, a cluster of machines leaning into the sharp bend of the road. Their riders, figures swathed in dark leather, barely visible beneath the storm's fury. A pack of bikers, out in weather that begged for shelter. Marlene Harris was still frozen in her bed, her heart a frantic bird, staring up at the ragged hole in her ceiling where the storm poured in. The sound of splintering wood and tearing metal had faded into the din of the rain, only to be replaced by the closer, deeper growl. The engines didn't pass. They slowed. The roar deepened, a menacing vibration that traveled through the soaked earth and up into the house's shaking foundation. One by one, the bikes pulled off the road and killed their engines. The sudden silence, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain, was worse than the noise. She didn't move. She couldn't. A shadow detached itself from the gloom outside her bedroom window, a figure silhouetted against the flash of distant lightning. It was too tall, too broad, a stark shape capped by something hard and round. A helmet. A heavy thud echoed from the porch. Then another, heavier. They were moving onto the property. A low, guttural voice carried through the storm's racket, muffled but distinct. "The lights are off. Nobody's home." Another voice, a cold rasp. "We're not here for tea, Tiny. Get to it. The clock's running." Marlene's weathered hands tightened on the quilt. This wasn't a fallen tree. This wasn't a spring storm. This was something else entirely. She scrambled backward, sliding silently off the edge of the bed and pressing her back against the wet wall, the cold plaster shocking her skin. A splintering crack came from the front of the house, the sound of wood giving way under a heavy, deliberate force. They weren't looking for shelter. They were looking to get in. The air in the bedroom felt thick, tasting of rain and old dust. Marlene crept to her window, her bare feet silent on the worn hardwood. Peeking through a crack in the drenched curtains, she saw them, three figures under the sickly yellow beam of a neighbor's porch light that barely pierced the fog. Their faces were obscured by the brims of their helmets in the rain, but their posture was aggressive, their movements quick. They had not entered through the broken front door. Not yet. One of the figures, the largest, was heading for the side of the house, toward the unattached garage, where George's old tools and, more importantly, the heavy iron poker from the fireplace were kept. The other two were already at the main door, the wood around the lock now visibly split and hanging loose. A loud, metallic clang from the side of the house. The garage door had been forced. Marlene spun around. The house had always been her fortress. But now every familiar corner felt like a trap. The floorboards were no longer comforting. They were loud. The silence that followed the biker's engine cutoff felt like a countdown. She knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had to get out, or she had to hide. The voices were closer now, echoing inside the small foyer. "Clear the downstairs, fast," the cold voice ordered. Marlene didn't think about the tea, the laundry, or the years of memories in the collapsing room. She thought only of the single, narrow window in her late husband's small study, the only one facing the dense, overgrown backyard. The heavy, measured footsteps began to climb the creaking stairs. Morning light filtered through the gaping holes in Marlene's roof, casting unusual shadows across her water-stained carpet. The storm had finally passed, but it left behind a devastating mess that made her heart sink. She stood in the middle of her living room, her shoulders slumped as she took in the damage. Water dripped steadily from several spots in the ceiling, creating small puddles on her worn hardwood floors. The familiar floral wallpaper, which had adorned her walls for decades, now peeled away in soggy strips. Her late husband's favorite armchair sat waterlogged in the corner, and the sight of it made her chest tighten. "Oh, George," she whispered, touching the damp fabric. "What am I going to do?" Marlene grabbed every pot and pan she owned, placing them strategically under the worst leaks. The constant plink-plink of water hitting metal created an overwhelming symphony of her helplessness. She wrapped her worn cardigan tighter around herself, trying to ward off the morning chill that now freely entered through the damaged roof. Moving carefully across the wet floor, she climbed the narrow stairs to her bedroom. The damage was even worse up here. The morning sun streamed through 3 large holes in the roof, highlighting the extensive water damage. Her bedding was soaked through, and a family photo album lay waterlogged on her bedside table. With trembling hands, Marlene picked up the photo album, carefully separating the wet pages. Most of the photos were ruined, the faces of her loved ones now blurred and faded. A tear rolled down her cheek as she came across a picture of George standing proudly in front of their cottage the day they bought it. Determined to do something, anything, Marlene went to the garage. She found some old tarps, a handful of nails, and George's toolbox, covered in dust from years of disuse. The wooden ladder creaked ominously as she set it against the side of the house. Her hands shook as she climbed, each step making her increasingly aware of her age and limitations. The first tarp was almost impossible to manage alone. 1 marrow. The wind kept catching it, making it billow like a sail. After an hour of struggling, she managed to secure one corner, but it was clearly inadequate. Back inside, Marlene surveyed her attempts at repair. Water still dripped through the makeshift covering, and the tarp flapped loosely in the wind. Her back ached from the effort, and her hands were scraped from handling the rough shingles. Exhausted and defeated, Marlene sank onto her sofa. The springs creaked beneath her, and she could feel the dampness seeping through her clothes. She looked around at her home, the home where she and George had raised their children, celebrated countless Christmases, and grown old together. Now it was falling apart around her, and she was powerless to stop it. The enormity of the situation crashed over her like another storm. Her fixed income barely covered her regular expenses, let alone major repairs. Insurance would help, but she knew there would be a deductible she couldn't afford. The house needed professional repairs, and those were far beyond her means. Marlene buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. The steady drip of water continued around her, a reminder of her impossible situation. For the first time since George's passing, she felt truly and completely alone. Marlene sat at her kitchen table the next morning, a cup of lukewarm coffee growing cold beside her. Her fingers trembled as she dialed yet another number from the yellow pages, which was already dog-eared from constant use. This was her 7th call of the morning. "Miller's Roofing. How can I help you?" a cheerful voice answered. "Yes. Hello," Marlene said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need someone to look at my roof. It was damaged in the storm yesterday." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we're completely booked for the next 3 weeks. The storm did a number on lots of houses in the area." Marlene's heart sank. "I understand, but my roof has several holes, and we might be able to squeeze you in next month," the receptionist offered. "Next month?" Marlene's voice cracked. "I can't wait that long. Thank you anyway." She hung up before the tears could start falling. The next contractor quoted a price that made her gasp. That's more than 3 months of my Social Security," she whispered into the phone. "I'm sorry, ma'am. With the extensive damage you're describing and the current demand, that's our standard rate." After hanging up, Marlene walked through her house, plastic buckets and pots still collecting water from the ceiling. The dripping had slowed, but dark water stains spread across the ceiling like bruises. The musty smell of wet drywall filled every room. Looking at George's old toolbox again, she decided to make another attempt at repairs. She dragged the ladder out once more, despite her aching muscles from yesterday's efforts. The late morning sun beat down on her as she climbed, carrying a bundle of supplies she'd scrounged up from the garage. Just one step at a time, she muttered to herself, George's old work gloves nearly sliding off her smaller hands. Halfway up the ladder, it shifted slightly, and Marlene grabbed the rungs tightly, her heart pounding. She looked down at the ground, suddenly aware of how high she was. What if she fell? Who would even know she was hurt? Still, she pressed on, reaching the roof's edge. The damage looked even worse in the daylight. Shingles lay scattered across the roof, and in some places she could see straight through to the wooden underlayment. She tried to lay down some plastic sheeting, but the wind kept catching it, nearly pulling her off balance. After an hour of frustrating attempts, Marlene had managed to secure just one small section, and it was already starting to pull loose. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the hammer, and sweat trickled down her back despite the cool air. Back inside, she sank into her chair, defeat weighing heavy on her shoulders. The phone book lay open beside her, but she couldn't bring herself to make another call. Every number she'd tried had led to another dead end. As evening approached, Marlene prepared for bed, though it was earlier than usual. She had to move her bed away from the worst of the leaks, cramming it awkwardly against the wall. The familiar comfort of her bedroom felt violated by the constant dripping and the chill seeping in through the damaged roof. Lying in bed, Marlene pulled her quilt up to her chin, listening to the occasional plop of water hitting the buckets. The house seemed to creak more than usual, or maybe she was just more aware of every sound now. In the darkness, her situation felt overwhelming, impossible to solve. For the first time in years, she wished desperately that George was still here, that she wasn't facing this alone. The morning sun cast long shadows across Marlene's worn porch as she sat in her favorite wicker chair, warming her hands around a chipped coffee mug. The familiar comfort of her morning ritual did little to ease the knot of worry in her stomach. Every few minutes, her eyes would drift to the torn shingles visible from where she sat, a constant reminder of her predicament. She took another sip of coffee, grimacing at its bitter taste. She hadn't been able to focus enough to make it properly this morning. The sound of birds chirping nearby felt like a mockery of her troubled thoughts. A low rumble in the distance caught her attention. At first, she thought it might be thunder, but the sky was clear and bright. The rumble grew louder, transforming into the unmistakable roar of motorcycle engines. Marlene set her coffee down, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the arms of her chair. The noise grew deafening as motorcycle after motorcycle appeared on her quiet street. Her eyes widened as she counted them, 20, 30, 40. Nearly 50 bikes in total. They pulled up in front of her house, their engines cutting off one by one until only the echo of their arrival remained in her ears. Marlene stood slowly, her heart pounding. The bikers were an intimidating sight, mostly older men and women, dressed in leather vests covered in patches. Some had gray hair and weathered faces, while others looked to be in their 50s. They began unloading tools and materials from small trailers attached to some of the bikes. A tall man with silver hair and kind eyes stepped forward from the group. His leather vest was adorned with military patches, and despite his imposing presence, there was a gentleness in the way he approached her porch. "Ma'am," he said, removing his riding gloves, "I'm Sam. We're the Silver Riders." He gestured to the group behind him. "We heard about what happened to your roof during the storm." Marlene's fingers clutched at her cardigan. "How did you?" "Small town." Sam smiled warmly. "Word gets around. We're a veterans charity group, and helping folks in need is what we do." The other bikers were already organizing themselves, carrying lumber and toolboxes toward her house. Marlene watched them, bewildered by the sudden activity transforming her quiet morning. I I can't afford to pay for all this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam shook his head. We're not here for payment, Mrs. Harris. We're here because it's the right thing to do. He pointed to the materials they'd brought. We've got everything needed to fix that roof, and plenty of willing hands to do the work. Tears welled up in Marlene's eyes as she looked at the group of strangers preparing to help her. One of the women bikers was already setting up a ladder, while others were laying out tarps to catch debris. I don't know what to say, Marlene said, dabbing at her eyes with her sleeve. You don't need to say anything, Sam replied. Just let us help you. Sometimes, accepting help is the bravest thing we can do. The bikers worked with practiced efficiency, setting up their equipment and organizing into teams. Their presence, which had initially seemed so intimidating, now felt like a blessing. Marlene watched as they began their work, their kindness cutting through the loneliness that had surrounded her since the storm. The rumble of footsteps on her roof filled Marlene's small kitchen as she stirred a large pitcher of fresh lemonade. Her hands trembled slightly as she added the last spoonful of sugar, still trying to process the whirlwind of activity that had descended upon her quiet home. Through her kitchen window, she could see the bikers moving with surprising efficiency, passing materials up to the roof and working together like a well-oiled machine. Marlene pulled her favorite chocolate chip cookies from the old ceramic cookie jar, the one her husband had given her on their 20th anniversary. She arranged them carefully on her best-serving plate, the china one with tiny blue flowers around the edges. The sound of laughter drifted down from above, followed by good-natured teasing and friendly banter. "Hand me that hammer, Mike," one voice called out. "Watch where you're stepping, Carol," another warned with a chuckle. Gathering her courage, Marlene stepped out onto her front porch, holding the tray of cookies in one hand and balancing the pitcher of lemonade in the other. Sam immediately spotted her and climbed down from the roof, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "Mrs. Harris, you didn't have to go through any trouble," he said, quickly taking the heavy pitcher from her hands. "Please, call me Marlene," she replied, her voice soft, "and it's the least I can do. I still can't believe you're all here." Sam called out to the others, and soon the bikers were gathering around, their faces streaked with sweat and dust. They thanked her profusely, treating her cookies like they were gourmet treats. Marlene watched in amazement as these tough-looking men and women, dressed in leather and denim, spoke to her with such genuine kindness and respect. "These cookies are amazing," exclaimed a woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a braid. "Just like my grandmother used to make. The secret is using real butter," Marlene found herself saying, warming to their genuine appreciation. As they took their brief break, Marlene observed how the group interacted. Despite their rough appearances, there was an undeniable gentleness in how they treated each other and her. They shared stories and jokes, making sure everyone had enough to drink in the warm sunshine. The damage to her roof looked less overwhelming with so many helping hands working on it. Where she had seen only hopelessness before, now she saw progress. Fresh plywood replaced the rotted sections, and new shingles were being laid with careful precision. Feeling a sudden urge to contribute more than just refreshments, Marlene spoke up. "Perhaps I could help somehow? Maybe pass tools up to you all?" Sam shook his head gently but firmly. "We appreciate the offer, Marlene, but we've got this covered. You've done more than enough with these delicious cookies and lemonade. Why don't you let us handle the heavy lifting?" His words were kind but left no room for argument. Marlene nodded, fighting back tears as she watched them return to work. The sound of hammers resumed, punctuated by calls for tools and materials. She stood on her porch, clutching her empty serving tray, overcome by a feeling she hadn't experienced in years: hope. A warm breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut wood and the sound of cheerful conversation. Marlene's heart felt fuller than it had since her husband passed away. These strangers, These unexpected angels in leather jackets had brought more than just tools and materials. They had brought light back into her world. The afternoon sun beat down on the busy scene in Marlene's yard. The rhythmic sound of hammers hitting nails filled the air as the bikers worked efficiently on her damaged roof. From her spot on the porch, she watched in amazement as they moved with practiced coordination, passing materials and tools to one another. "Water? Anyone?" Marlene called out, holding up a fresh pitcher of ice-cold lemonade. Several bikers climbed down to take a break, their faces streaked with sweat and dirt. As she poured drinks, she noticed Sam standing off to the side, his expression troubled as he examined the corner of her house. He ran his hand along the weathered siding, then crouched down to look at something near the foundation. "Hey, Mike," Sam called to one of the other bikers. "Come take a look at this." Mike, a stocky man with silver hair, made his way over. The two men spoke in hushed tones, pointing at various spots along the wall. More bikers began gathering around them, their faces growing serious as they inspected the area. Marlene's stomach tightened. She set down the pitcher and walked over to them, her hands clasped nervously. "Is everything all right?" Sam straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. He exchanged glances with the others before turning to her. "Mind if we take a walk around the house, Marlene?" She nodded, her throat suddenly dry. As they circled the cottage, Sam pointed out several concerning signs she'd never noticed before: hairline cracks in the foundation, places where the walls weren't quite straight anymore, spots where water damage had caused the wood to rot. "The thing is," Sam explained, his voice gentle, "these issues didn't just happen overnight. The storm definitely made things worse, but there's been water seeping into the foundation for years. See these cracks?" He gestured to a long fissure running along the concrete. "That's from the house settling unevenly." Marlene's chest felt tight as she looked at her beloved home through new eyes. All the little things she'd dismissed over the years, the slightly sloping floors, the windows that didn't quite close right, the doors that stuck in their frames, suddenly made terrible sense. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam took off his bandana and twisted it in his hands. "The roof we can fix. That's not a problem. But the foundation issues." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "They're pretty serious, Marlene. Without proper repairs, the whole structure could become unsafe." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She reached out and steadied herself against the wall of her home, the same walls that had sheltered her through decades of memories, joy, and heartache. The house where she'd raised her children, where she'd spent her last precious years with her husband. "The foundation," she repeated numbly. "But that would cost." She couldn't even finish the sentence. The roof repairs alone had been far beyond her means. Foundation work would be catastrophically expensive. Sam placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I know this is overwhelming," he said softly. "We can patch up the roof today, make it weathertight. But I wouldn't be doing right by you if I didn't tell you about these other problems. The house needs more work to be truly safe." Marlene felt her heart sink as she looked up at her home, seeing now what Sam and the others had discovered. The magnitude of the problem was crushing. Marlene sat on her worn porch swing, watching the bikers work. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her yard, and the air was thick with the sounds of hammering and friendly chatter. Sam wiped his brow and made his way over to her, settling down on the swing beside her with a gentle creak. "Mind if I take a break?" he asked, accepting the glass of lemonade she offered. "Of course not. You've all been working so hard." Marlene's voice wavered slightly. "I still can't believe you're all here." Sam took a long drink before setting the glass down. His weathered face softened as he looked at her. "You know, this reminds me of my time in the service. We always looked out for each other, no matter what." "You were in the military?" Marlene asked, her interest piqued. 20 years. Served in places I can barely pronounce. He chuckled, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. Lost some good friends along the way. That's why I started the Silver Riders. Needed to find a way to keep helping people, you know? Marlene nodded, understanding the need to find purpose. My Robert was in the service too, Vietnam. She paused, her fingers twisting the gold band she still wore. We had 42 wonderful years together before cancer took him. I'm sorry, Sam said quietly. How long has it been? 3 years next month. Marlene's eyes misted over. The house feels so empty now. Sometimes I catch myself talking to him, setting two places at the table. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm sorry, I don't mean to burden you with all this. Hey now. Sam's voice was gentle but firm. It's not a burden. Losing someone you love, that's not something you just get over. From the yard, they could hear laughter as one of the bikers told a joke. Marlene watched them work, these strangers who had become her unexpected angels. The hardest part is the silence, she admitted. Robert and I used to sit right here on this swing every evening. He'd tell me about his day at work, I'd share the neighborhood gossip. A small smile touched her lips at the memory. Now it's just me and my thoughts. Sam was quiet for a moment. You know, after I came back from my last tour, I couldn't stand being alone either, kept hearing echoes of things I wanted to forget. He shifted in his seat, the swing swaying gently. These folks, he gestured to the bikers, they saved me, gave me a new family when I needed one most. Marlene watched as two bikers helped each other carry supplies up a ladder. Another group was checking the foundation, heads bent together in discussion. Despite the serious work, there was an air of camaraderie that reminded her of better days. They're good people, she said softly. The best, Sam agreed. And now they're here for you too. Something warm spread through Marlene's chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't just gratitude for the help with her house, it was the realization that she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. Thank you, Sam, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Not just for the repairs, but for... She gestured vaguely, unable to find the right words. Sam seemed to understand. He patted her hand gently before standing up. That's what friends are for, Marlene. The morning sun cast long shadows across Marlene's front yard as she watched the bikers return for another day of work. Their motorcycles rumbled up her driveway, the familiar sound now bringing comfort rather than uncertainty. Sam waved as he dismounted his bike, his weathered face creasing into a warm smile. Just as the bikers began unloading their tools, a gentle tap on her shoulder made Marlene turn. Her neighbor Greg stood there, his gray hair tousled by the morning breeze. His usual cheerful expression was replaced by a worried frown. "Morning, Marlene," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "I saw all the commotion yesterday. These folks helping you with the roof?" Marlene nodded, gesturing toward the bikers. "They showed up out of nowhere, Greg, like angels on motorcycles." She managed a small laugh, but it faded when she saw Greg's expression hadn't lightened. "That's good you've got help," Greg said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Not everyone's been so lucky. The Johnsons down the street, their basements flooded. And the Petersons lost half their shingles." Marlene's chest tightened. "The storm hit others too?" "Half the neighborhood at least." Greg shook his head, his shoulders slumping. "Called the mayor's office yesterday. You know what they told me? They said they're assessing the situation. Whatever that means." Sam approached them, wiping his hands on a red bandana. "Everything okay here?" Greg introduced himself, then repeated what he'd told Marlene. Sam's expression grew serious as he listened. "The mayor's always been more interested in downtown development than helping folks out here," Greg continued. "Sarah from the grocery store tried to get him to declare a state of emergency for the neighborhood. He wouldn't even take her call." Marlene's hands trembled slightly as she wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself. The morning suddenly felt colder. She watched the bikers working on her roof, their dedication evident in every movement. But Greg's words made her wonder if it would be enough. "How bad is it, really?" she asked Greg, her voice barely above a whisper. Greg ran a hand through his hair. "Bad enough that people are talking about moving. The Hendersons already put their house up for sale. They can't afford the repairs." And with the mayor dragging his feet on assistance, he trailed off, leaving the implications hanging in the air. Sam placed a reassuring hand on Marlene's shoulder. "We're here for you, Marlene. We'll figure something out." But Marlene felt the weight of uncertainty settling in her stomach. The bikers were kind and skilled, but they couldn't fix everyone's homes. And if the mayor wasn't helping, what would happen to her neighbors? To her community? She watched as more motorcycles pulled into her driveway. The Silver Riders were bringing additional supplies, their dedication unwavering. But Greg's news had cast a shadow over their efforts. If the town's leadership wouldn't support its residents, even the most determined helpers might face insurmountable obstacles. Still, as she observed the bikers working together, passing tools and sharing jokes, Marlene straightened her shoulders. These people had chosen to help her when no one else would. Their presence had to mean something. Maybe it wasn't just about fixing a roof anymore. Maybe it was about showing what a community could do when they came together. Marlene sat in her favorite armchair, a worn quilt draped over her knees as she watched the evening news. The familiar drone of the TV usually helped her relax after a long day, but tonight was different. Her cup of chamomile tea grew cold on the side table as the local news anchor's voice caught her attention. "Breaking news from City Hall," the anchor announced, her perfectly styled hair gleaming under the studio lights. "Mayor Thompson has just announced new emergency zoning regulations in response to last week's devastating storm." Marlene leaned forward, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. The screen switched to show the mayor standing at a podium, his gray suit pristine and his expression stern. "The recent storm has exposed serious structural issues in many of our older homes," the mayor declared, his voice carrying an air of authority that made Marlene's stomach clench. "To ensure public safety, we're implementing immediate measures. Properties with significant damage must be brought up to code within 60 days, or the city will be forced to take action." The teacup rattled as Marlene's hand shook. She reached for the remote and turned up the volume. "Homeowners who cannot comply with these new regulations may face condemnation of their properties," the mayor continued. "While we understand this may cause hardship for some residents, we must prioritize safety and maintain our community's standards." Marlene's chest tightened as the reality of his words sank in. 60 days. The roof repairs were already stretching her resources thin, and now with the foundation problems. The news anchor reappeared, explaining the details of the new regulations. According to City Hall, affected homeowners will receive official notices within the week. The regulations specifically target properties with structural damage, including roof and foundation issues. Marlene's living room suddenly felt too small, too confining. The walls she'd loved for decades now seemed to close in around her. Pictures of her late husband smiled down from their familiar places, and her eyes welled up with tears. This home held every memory she treasured: their first Christmas together, quiet Sunday mornings sharing coffee, the last conversation they'd had before he passed. The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. It was her neighbor, Greg. "Marlene, are you watching this?" His voice was thick with concern. "Yes," she whispered, barely able to get the word out. "I'm watching it. It's not right, what they're doing," Greg said. "They can't just force people out of their homes like this." But they could, Marlene knew. The mayor's words echoed in her mind. Properties with significant damage must be brought up to code. Condemnation. Each phrase felt like another nail in the coffin of her hopes. She thought of the bikers working so hard on her roof, of Sam's kind eyes when he'd explained about the foundation problems. They'd given her hope, but now it felt like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. The roof repairs weren't even finished yet, and the foundation work hadn't even begun. 60 days wasn't nearly enough time. Marlene hung up the phone after reassuring Greg she'd be okay, though they both knew it was a lie. She sat in her darkening living room as the news moved on to other stories, but she barely heard them. Her home, her sanctuary, the place where she'd built her life, it could all be taken away because of one storm and a politician's decree. The weight of helplessness pressed down on her shoulders. For the first time since the storm hit, Marlene felt truly defeated. Not even the kindness of 50 bikers could save her from this new threat. Sam paced back and forth in the parking lot of the local diner, his weathered boots scuffing against the pavement. Around him, 20 members of the Silver Riders had gathered for an emergency meeting, their faces grim under the afternoon sun. "This isn't right," Sam growled, running a hand through his gray hair. "The mayor can't just force people out of their homes like this, not after everything they've been through." Mike, one of the older bikers, leaned against his Harley. "What about a fundraiser? We could organize a bike rally, charge an entry fee." "Good start," Sam nodded. "But we need more than that. The foundation work alone will cost thousands." Sarah, a former military nurse with silver streaks in her dark hair, raised her hand. "I know some contractors who might give us a discount, and my church group could help with a bake sale." The suggestions came pouring in from the gathered bikers. A charity auction, a GoFundMe page, a weekend barbecue with live music. Each idea built upon the last, but Sam's frown deepened with every passing minute. "These are all good ideas," he said, "but we're running against the clock here. The mayor's given everyone 30 days to comply with the new regulations." He pulled out a crumpled newspaper from his back pocket, pointing to the announcement. "Look at this language. Properties deemed unsafe or below code will be subject to immediate action." They're not even trying to hide what they're doing. Jerry, a retired construction worker, spoke up. "We could probably fix the foundation in 2 weeks if we had enough hands and materials. But the permits alone—" "That's just it," Sam interrupted. "They're using bureaucracy against us. Even if we raise the money, they could still deny the permits or drag out the inspection process." The group fell silent, the weight of the challenge settling over them like a heavy cloud. The rumble of passing traffic filled the uncomfortable pause. Linda, one of the newer members, cleared her throat. "What about the media? If we get the local news involved?" "Now that's thinking." Sam's eyes lit up. "We need to make noise, show everyone what's really happening here." The meeting continued for another hour, with Sam taking notes on a worn notepad. They divided into teams. Some would handle fundraising, others would work on getting materials donated, and a few would reach out to local reporters. Meanwhile, across town, Marlene sat in her favorite armchair, staring at the water stains on her ceiling. The house creaked around her, familiar sounds that used to bring comfort, but now felt like warnings. Her fingers traced the worn fabric of the armrest, remembering how she and her late husband had picked out this chair together. The evening light cast long shadows through her windows when her phone rang. She almost didn't answer it, but something made her reach for the receiver. "Marlene?" Sam's voice was warm and determined. "We're not giving up. The whole group's behind you, and we've got plans." She clutched the phone tighter, her voice wavering. "Sam, I appreciate everything you're doing, but the mayor has the law on his side. Maybe it's time I accepted that some battles can't be won. No battle is lost until you stop fighting." Sam's voice grew gentler. "Trust us, Marlene. We're not walking away from this." Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked around her home, at the faded wallpaper her husband had helped her pick out, at the marks on the door frame where she'd measured her children's heights, at all the memories these walls held. "I do trust you, Sam," she whispered. "I'm just scared." I know, he replied softly, but you're not alone anymore. Remember that. The community center buzzed with activity as people streamed through its doors. Tables lined the walls, loaded with baked goods, handmade crafts, and donation boxes. The Silver Riders had transformed the usually quiet space into a hub of hope and activity. Marlene stood near the entrance, watching in amazement as familiar and unfamiliar faces filled the room. Her hands trembled slightly as she greeted each person who approached. Sam stayed close by, his steady presence keeping her grounded. "I can't believe how many people came," Marlene whispered to Sam, her voice thick with emotion. "People care more than you think, Marlene," Sam replied, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Look at Mrs. Peterson over there." She brought 3 pies and a check. The elderly Mrs. Peterson waved from across the room, her weathered face beaming. Behind her, 2 teenage boys carried boxes of tools, a donation from their father's hardware store. The bikers moved through the crowd with purpose. Some manned the donation tables, while others shared Marlene's story with attendees. Their leather vests seemed out of place among the townspeople's casual attire, but their warm smiles and earnest words bridged any gaps. "We've got another contractor offering discounted services," announced Mike, one of the younger bikers, rushing up to Sam with a business card. "Says he can help with the foundation work." Marlene watched as people dropped bills into the donation boxes. Each contribution, no matter how small, brought tears to her eyes. A young girl approached her with a homemade card, decorated with glitter and drawings of a house. "My mommy says you need help with your house," the little girl said, holding out the card. "I drew this for you." Marlene's hands shook as she accepted the card. "Thank you, sweetheart," she managed to say, her voice catching. As the evening progressed, the crowd grew larger. Local musicians set up in one corner, playing soft country tunes that filled the air. The atmosphere was festive, yet purposeful. Everyone understood why they were there. The Silver Riders' treasurer, a retired accountant named Bob, periodically updated the total amount raised on a large whiteboard. Each new number brought cheers from the crowd. People who couldn't contribute money offered their services, plumbing work, electrical repairs, even legal advice. Near the end of the Plumino night, Bob wrote the final figure on the board. The room fell silent as people processed the number. It was more than anyone had expected. But Marlene knew it still might not be enough to save her home from the mayor's new regulations. Sam addressed the crowd, his voice carrying across the quiet room. "Tonight shows what our community is made of," he said, standing tall in his leather vest. "We're not done fighting for Marlene's home. This is just the beginning." The crowd applauded, but Marlene felt a familiar weight settling in her chest. The mayor's face flashed in her mind, his stern expression when he'd announced the new regulations, his dismissal of the community's concerns. As people began to leave, many stopped to hug Marlene or shake her hand. Each person promised to help however they could, their words sincere but unable to completely dispel her worry. The bikers stayed behind to clean up, their determination evident in their quick movements and ongoing discussions about next steps. Marlene sat in a folding chair, clutching the little girl's card to her chest, torn between gratitude for the evening's success and fear that it wouldn't be enough to overcome the mayor's stubbornness. Sam approached her one last time, concern etched on his weathered face. "We're not giving up, Marlene, not by a long shot." She nodded, trying to hold on to hope, even as doubt crept in around the edges of her mind. The morning sun cast long shadows across Marlene's living room as she sat on her worn floral couch, watching the local news. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her coffee mug, the liquid inside growing cold and forgotten. On the small TV screen, Mayor Thompson stood at a podium, his silver hair neatly combed and his suit pristinely pressed. "The new zoning regulations will be enforced without exception," he announced, his voice firm and unwavering. While we understand some residents are facing difficulties, we must maintain standards to protect property values and ensure public safety. Marlene's stomach tightened as she watched. The mayor's words felt like physical blows, each one chipping away at her remaining hope. She thought of all the fundraising efforts the bikers had organized over the past week, the bake sales, the car washes, the donation drives. The community had shown such incredible support, but now it seemed meaningless in the face of bureaucracy. Furthermore, the mayor continued, adjusting his tie, any properties not brought up to code within the specified time frame will face consequences, including potential seizure by the town. Outside, the sound of motorcycles rumbled through the street. Sam and a few other bikers pulled up to her house. But Marlene couldn't bring herself to move from the couch. She heard their boots on her porch steps, followed by a gentle knock at the door. "It's open," she called out weakly. Sam entered first, followed by two other bikers, Mike and Linda. Their faces fell as they saw the news broadcast still playing on the TV. "Marlene," Sam said softly, "don't let him get to you. We're not done fighting." She shook her head, feeling tears well up in her eyes. "Look at him, Sam. He doesn't care about any of us. All our efforts, all the money we've raised, it won't matter if he won't give us time to make the repairs." Linda sat down beside Marlene, placing a weathered hand on her shoulder. "We've got more support than you know. The whole town's talking about it. People are angry about how he's handling this." "But what good does that do?" Marlene's voice cracked. "He has the power. He has the law on his side. I'm tired of fighting." She set her coffee mug down on the side table, her hands shaking too much to hold it steady. "Maybe it's time to accept that I can't win this one." Mike, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that's not the Marlene we've come to know. The woman who's been baking cookies for our fundraisers and sharing stories with us, she's a fighter." But Marlene couldn't meet their eyes. On the TV, the mayor was now taking questions from reporters, deflecting concerns about elderly residents with practiced political ease. Each smooth answer seemed to drain more energy from her body. "I appreciate everything you've all done," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think it's time to stop. I don't want anyone else putting in more effort for a lost cause." Sam knelt in front of her, his lined face set with determination. "Marlene, look at me." He waited until she raised her eyes to meet his. "We're not giving up. Even if you decide to stop fighting, we won't. This isn't just about your house anymore. It's about standing up to bullies who think they can push around good people." But Marlene had already made up her mind. She stood up slowly, walked to the window, and stared out at her garden, the roses she'd planted with her late husband, the bird feeder that brought cardinals every morning. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I'm done," she said quietly. "I can't do this anymore." The bikers exchanged worried glances, but their expressions remained resolute. They weren't about to let Marlene's home slip away, even if she'd lost the will to fight for it herself. Sam sat with Marlene on her weathered front porch, the evening sun casting long shadows across the yard. The sound of crickets filled the air as they shared cups of coffee. Marlene's hands trembled slightly as she held her mug, still shaken from watching the mayor's heartless announcement on TV. "You know," Sam said, his voice gentle but firm, "this reminds me of something that happened to me years ago." He adjusted his position in the old wooden chair, its familiar creak matching the thoughtful pause in his words. Marlene looked up from her coffee, noticing how the fading sunlight caught the silver in Sam's hair. His usual confident demeanor had softened, revealing something more vulnerable. "I was stationed in Afghanistan," he continued, "leading a unit of young soldiers. We were tasked with protecting a small village that was crucial for supply routes." He took a slow sip of coffee. "One day, we got word that a massive enemy force was heading our way. We were outnumbered 5-1, with no immediate backup available. Marlene set her cup down, her attention fully captured by Sam's story. The worry lines on her face momentarily smoothed as she focused on his words rather than her own troubles. Everyone told us to abandon the village, said it was a lost cause. Sam's eyes grew distant with the memory. But there were families there, Marlene. Children, elderly folks who couldn't just pack up and leave. Reminded me a lot of you, actually. He offered a warm smile. They were facing impossible odds, but that village was their home. What did you do? Marlene asked softly. We stayed. Got creative. Reached out to every contact we had. Called in favors from people we hadn't spoken to in years. Sam leaned forward, his voice growing more passionate. And you know what happened? People showed up. Other units found ways to help. The villagers themselves joined in the effort. We turned that village into a fortress, and when the enemy arrived, they found something they didn't expect: a community united. Marlene's eyes welled with tears. Did you save the village? We did more than that, Sam replied, his voice thick with emotion. We showed everyone what's possible when people refuse to give up, when they stand together. That village still stands today, stronger than ever. He reached over and gently patted Marlene's hand. Sometimes the biggest battles aren't won with weapons, but with determination and faith in others. The parallel to her situation wasn't lost on Marlene. She thought about the bikers who had shown up on her doorstep, about the community members who had contributed to the fundraiser, about Sam sitting here, now refusing to let her fight alone. I was ready to give up, she admitted, wiping away a tear. It just seemed too big to fight. Nothing's too big when you've got people in your corner, Sam said firmly. Those bikers out there? They're your army now, and just like those villagers taught me, sometimes the biggest victories come from the battles everyone else says you can't win. Marlene straightened in her chair, feeling something shift inside her. The mayor's threats suddenly seemed less intimidating. She looked at her home, weathered and damaged, but still standing, just like her. You're right, Sam, she said, her voice growing stronger. This is my home, and if you could save a village in Afghanistan, maybe we can save this little house in our town. She stood up, squaring her shoulders. I'm not giving up, not when so many people have already shown me such kindness. Sam smiled, recognizing the familiar spark of determination in her eyes, the same kind he'd seen in those villagers years ago. That's the spirit, Marlene. That's the spirit. The morning sun cast long shadows across the town square as dozens of motorcycles rumbled to a stop in front of the mayor's office. Marlene's hands trembled as she watched the silver riders set up their protest signs. Some read, "Save Marlene's home," while others declared, "Community over politics." Sam stood beside her, his weathered face creased with determination. You don't have to speak if you don't want to, he said softly, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. We're all here for you. Marlene nodded, clutching her worn cardigan closer. The sight of news vans pulling up made her stomach twist into knots. Camera crews began setting up their equipment, and reporters huddled nearby, speaking into microphones. There must be 50 people here already, Marlene whispered, watching as more townspeople joined the bikers. Some carried homemade signs, others brought lawn chairs and thermoses of coffee. Word spreads. Fast in a small town, Sam replied with a smile, especially when good people are being wronged. The protest grew louder as more people arrived. The bikers started a chant, "Save our homes, save our neighbor." The rhythm of their voices echoed off the building's brick walls. A reporter approached Marlene, microphone extended. "Ma'am, would you like to share your story?" Marlene stepped back, her heart racing. Sam moved closer, his presence steady and reassuring. "Remember what we talked about," he said. "This is your chance to be heard. Your home matters. Your story matters. Taking a deep breath, Marlene looked at the faces around her, the bikers who had worked tirelessly on her roof, the neighbors who had donated to the fundraiser, even strangers who had come to show their support. Their kindness had given her something she thought she'd lost: hope. I'll speak, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam guided her toward the steps of the mayor's office, where someone had set up a small podium. The crowd grew quiet as Marlene approached the microphone. Her hands shook as she gripped the edges of the podium. "I've lived in my house for 43 years," she began, her voice quavering. "My late husband and I raised our children there. We planted every flower in the garden together." She paused, gathering strength from the encouraging nods around her. "When the storm damaged my roof, I thought I was alone." Tears welled in her eyes, but she pressed on. "But then these wonderful people showed up. The Silver Riders. They didn't know me, but they came to help anyway." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "Now the mayor wants to take my home because it needs repairs. But what he doesn't understand is that a home is more than just walls and a roof. It's memories. It's love. It's community." The crowd cheered, and Marlene felt something shift inside her. Years of quiet suffering gave way to determination. "This town showed me what community means. These bikers, my neighbors, even strangers, they all came together to help me. That's what this town should be about. Not forcing people out of their homes, but helping them stay in them." Reporters scribbled in their notepads as cameras flashed. The crowd's support swelled, their chants growing louder. Marlene stood straighter, Sam's proud smile giving her courage. "I'm not asking for charity," she declared, her voice clear and strong. "I'm asking for compassion. I'm asking for the chance to keep my home, to repair it with the help of these wonderful people who've become my family." The crowd erupted in applause. As Marlene stepped back from the podium, she felt lighter somehow. Sam wrapped her in a quick hug, and the bikers gathered around her protectively. "You did good, Marlene," Sam said, his eyes shining with pride. "You did real good." Marlene's hands trembled as she held the official letter from the mayor's office. The crisp white paper felt heavy, like it carried the weight of her entire world. She read the words again, though they hadn't changed since the first time. She had 30 days to either sell her property or face eviction. "This can't be happening," she whispered, sinking into her worn armchair. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows through her window, highlighting the water stains on her ceiling. Constant reminders of where this all began. Sam stood by the window, his weathered face tight with anger. The other bikers had gathered in her living room, their usual jovial demeanor replaced by grim determination. The protest had drawn attention, but the mayor hadn't budged. "We've tried everything," Marlene said, her voice catching. "The fundraiser, the protest, even the news coverage. But he won't listen." She looked around the room, at the faded wallpaper her husband had helped her pick out 30 years ago, at the marks on the doorframe where she'd measured her children's heights, at the memories embedded in every corner. "There's still time," one of the bikers said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sam crossed the room and knelt beside Marlene's chair. "Listen to me, Marlene. This isn't over. We're not giving up." She managed a weak smile, touching his hand. "I appreciate everything you've all done. More than you know, but maybe." She paused, the words stuck in her throat. "Maybe it's time to accept reality." The room fell silent. Through the window, she could hear birds chirping. The same birds that woke her every morning, that had been her companions through years of solitude after her husband passed. "I could find an apartment," she continued, though each word felt like a betrayal. "Something small, manageable. It wouldn't be so bad." But her voice cracked on the last word, and tears spilled down her cheeks. Sam squeezed her hand. "Don't make any decisions yet. Please." One of the bikers, Mary, moved to sit on the arm of Marlene's chair. "Remember what you said at the protest? About how this house isn't just walls and a roof, it's your history, your life?" Marlene nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "But what choice do I have? The foundation needs major repairs. The roof is barely holding together, even with your patches. And now, the mayor." She gestured helplessly at the letter. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across her living room floor. Outside, more motorcycles rumbled up her driveway, more members of the Silver Riders arriving to show their support. But even their presence couldn't dispel the heavy cloud of defeat that hung over the room. Sam stood up slowly, his joints creaking. "I know you're tired, Marlene. I know this feels impossible. But sometimes the darkest moment comes right before things turn around." Marlene looked down at the letter again, at the cold, official language that threatened to erase decades of her life. The thought of packing up, of leaving behind the home where she'd raised her children, where she'd spent her last moments with her husband. Oh. It felt like dying a little. "I need some time," she whispered, her voice rough with emotion, "to think about everything." The bikers nodded in understanding. One by one, they touched her shoulder or patted her hand as they filed out, leaving only Sam standing by her chair. "We're not done fighting," he said softly. "Remember that." But as Marlene sat alone in her darkening living room, the letter still clutched in her hands, she wasn't sure how much fight she had left in her. The morning sun filtered through Marlene's kitchen window, casting long shadows across cardboard boxes scattered throughout her home. Her trembling hands wrapped her favorite china teacup in newspaper, carefully placing it in a box marked "Fragile" in thick black marker. She paused, holding another cup, the one her husband used every morning for 40 years. The familiar chip on its rim brought tears to her eyes. Each item she packed felt like saying goodbye to a piece of her life, a memory being sealed away. "I can't believe it's come to this," she whispered to herself, her voice catching. Sam had offered his garage to store her things, but the thought of her belongings sitting in someone else's space made her chest tight. The realtor would be coming tomorrow with paperwork, and she needed to be ready. In the living room, photos lined the walls, her children growing up, her husband's proud smile at their daughter's graduation, countless Christmas mornings. Marlene's hands shook as she took down each frame, wrapping them carefully. The doorbell rang, startling her. She opened it to find Sam standing there, his usual confident demeanor replaced with concern. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly. "I do, Sam. I appreciate everything you and the others have done, but—" She gestured at the boxes. "This is something I need to face by myself." Sam nodded, understanding in his eyes. "At least let me help with the heavy stuff." "No," Marlene said, firmly, though her voice wavered. "Please, every time I pack something, I remember when we bought it, or who gave it to us, or—" She stopped, wiping her eyes. "I need to say goodbye properly." In her bedroom, Marlene opened her closet. Her husband's old flannel shirt still hung there, and she pressed it to her face, breathing in. After all these years, it still held a trace of his scent. She folded it carefully, adding it to a box marked "Keep." The afternoon crept by as she worked methodically through each room. Every object held a story, every drawer contained memories. By sunset, most of her life was packed away in neat boxes, labeled and stacked. Marlene sat on her old couch, the only piece of furniture still uncovered, and looked around at the bare walls. Shadows lengthened across the floor, and the house felt hollow, like it already knew she was leaving. The phone's sharp ring cut through the silence, making her jump. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her reach for it. "Hello?" Her voice sounded tired, even to her own ears. "Marlene? It's Jennifer from the hardware store," came the familiar voice. "Listen, I've been talking with some folks in town. We've been thinking about what's happening with your house. And, well, we want to help." Marlene's breath caught. What do you mean? The whole town's been talking about it. Mike from the lumber yard is willing to donate materials. My brother-in-law's a contractor, and he's offering his services at cost. And those wonderful bikers of yours, they've got half the businesses in town ready to pitch in. Marlene sank deeper into the couch, her free hand covering her mouth. Jennifer's words tumbled out faster now, full of excitement and hope. The coffee shop is hosting a fundraiser next week. The church group is organizing volunteers. Even old Mr. Peterson from the bank is talking about setting up a special loan program for storm-damaged homes. The phone trembled in Marlene's hand as she listened to Jennifer detail how the town was coming together, her packed boxes suddenly looking less final in the fading light. The morning sun cast long shadows across Marlene's front yard as pickup trucks and cars began arriving one by one. Local hardware store owner Bob Thompson stepped out of his truck, the bed loaded with lumber and roofing materials. "Morning, Marlene," he called out cheerfully. "Thought you could use some supplies." Marlene stood on her porch, clutching her coffee mug with trembling hands. More vehicles pulled up. Contractors, electricians, and familiar faces from around town. The rumble of motorcycles filled the air as the Silver Riders arrived, led by Sam's weathered smile. "What's all this?" Marlene asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sam walked up to her porch, his eyes twinkling. "Remember when I said we weren't giving up? Well, seems like the whole town agrees. Jenny from the diner showed up with boxes of donuts and thermoses of coffee. Can't let these workers go hungry," she said with a wink. The local lumber mill sent 3 workers with additional materials. Even Mr. Peterson, the retired architect, came with his old drafting tools and expertise. "We've got enough materials and manpower to fix everything," Sam explained, gesturing to the growing crowd. "Foundation, roof, whatever needs doing, it's all covered." Tears welled up in Marlene's eyes as she watched people setting up workstations around her house. The Silver Riders organized themselves into teams, their leather vests catching the morning light. Local contractors discussed plans with Mr. Peterson, pointing at different areas of the house. "I don't know what to say," Marlene managed, her voice cracking. "Don't say anything," Sam replied gently. "Just let us help." The work began in earnest. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air, mixing with laughter and friendly chatter. Young apprentices worked alongside seasoned professionals. The Silver Riders moved with purpose, carrying materials and following the contractor's instructions. Mrs. Wilson from the quilting circle arrived with sandwiches for everyone. "We take care of our own," she said, hugging Marlene tight. Throughout the morning, Marlene watched in amazement as her community transformed into a well-oiled machine. The foundation crew dug and reinforced the weak spots. Roofers stripped away damaged shingles while others prepared new ones. Even the local paint store owner showed up with gallons of paint in Marlene's favorite soft yellow color. "Look at them all," Marlene said to Sam, who stood beside her on the porch. "I never knew." "Sometimes it takes a storm to show us what we've had all along," Sam replied, squeezing her shoulder. The work continued as the sun climbed higher. Someone had set up a radio, and classic rock played softly in the background. Every now and then, someone would break into song, and others would join in. The atmosphere was more like a barn raising than a repair job. Marlene watched as her broken house began to heal under the caring hands of her neighbors. The roof that had been torn apart was being carefully rebuilt. The foundation that had weakened was growing stronger. But more than the physical repairs, she felt something else being restored. Her faith in people, in community, in the power of kindness. She thought about the storm that had started it all. What had seemed like the end of everything had somehow become a beginning. As she watched the Silver Riders working side by side with local contractors, saw old Mrs. Wilson passing out cookies to sweaty workers, and heard the happy chatter of people who had come together for no other reason than to help, Marlene felt her heart swell with gratitude. The house that had felt so lonely for so long was now filled with the warmth of community, the sound of laughter, and the spirit of generosity. Marlene sat down on her porch swing, overwhelmed by the scene before her, knowing that this day would stay with her forever. Marlene stood in her newly repaired living room, running her hand along the freshly painted walls. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting warm patches of light across the hardwood floors. Everything felt different now. Not just the house itself, but the very air she breathed. She walked slowly through each room, taking in the changes. The roof no longer creaked when the wind blew, and the foundation stood solid beneath her feet. But it was more than just the physical repairs that moved her. Every nail, every board, and every brushstroke held a story of kindness. "I never thought I'd see the day," she whispered to herself, pausing by the kitchen window. Outside, a few of the Silver Riders were finishing up the last bits of exterior work. Their motorcycles lined her driveway, a sight that had become wonderfully familiar over the past weeks. The sound of hammering mixed with laughter drifted through the open window. Two local contractors were showing a younger biker how to properly seal the window frames. Across the yard, Mrs. Peterson from the bakery was setting up a table with coffee and pastries for the workers. Even Mr. Thompson, who rarely left his house, had been coming by daily with his toolbox to help. Marlene's eyes welled up with tears as she remembered how close she'd come to giving up. The memory of that official letter from the mayor's office still stung, but now it seemed like a distant nightmare. She'd learned something profound through all of this, that strength wasn't about facing things alone, but about letting others in. A gentle knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Sam stood in the doorway, his usual warm smile on his weathered face. "How are you holding up, Marlene?" "Oh, Sam," she said, wiping her eyes quickly. "I was just thinking about everything. About how different things are now." He stepped inside, his boots leaving no marks on the new floor. He'd been careful about that, just like he'd been careful about everything else. "Different good or different bad?" "Different wonderful," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I used to think I was doing the right thing, you know. Keeping to myself, not bothering anyone. But I was just hiding." Sam nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Sometimes the hardest thing is letting people see you need them. And now look at all this." Marlene gestured around her. "The whole town came together. People I barely knew before are now like family. Even young Tommy from the hardware store stops by every morning just to check if I need anything." Through the window, they could see more townspeople arriving, carrying tools and supplies. Someone had brought a radio, and music floated through the air, mixing with the sounds of work and conversation. "We've got just a few finishing touches left," Sam said, pulling out a small list from his pocket. "The trim in the hallway, some touch-up paint in the kitchen. Would you like to help? Might be nice to put your own mark on these final pieces." Marlene smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I'd like that very much, Sam." She paused, trying to find the right words. "Thank you. Not just for this, but for everything. For not letting me give up, for showing me what community really means." The morning sun cast long shadows across the town square as crowds gathered for the mayor's press conference. Marlene stood near the front, surrounded by her newfound family of bikers. Sam's steady presence beside her gave her strength as she waited, her hands clasped tightly together. The mayor approached the podium, looking different from his usual confident self. His shoulders seemed heavier, and for the first time, Marlene noticed the dark circles under his eyes. The usual political polish was gone, replaced by something more genuine. "Good morning," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "I've called this meeting today because I need to address something important." He paused, removing his reading glasses and setting them aside. Sometimes, in our rush to progress, we forget what truly matters in a community. Marlene felt Sam's hand rest supportively on her shoulder. Around them, the crowd stood silent, waiting. "I've watched over the past weeks as this town has come together to help one of our own," the mayor continued. "Mrs. Marlene Harris's story has shown me something I had forgotten." His voice cracked slightly. "It's shown me that the strength of our town isn't in our buildings or our laws, it's in our people." The crowd murmured in agreement. Marlene felt tears welling up in her eyes as the mayor looked directly at her. "Mrs. Harris, I owe you a public apology. The zoning regulations I tried to enforce were wrong. They were cold, impersonal rules that ignored the human cost." He stepped away from the podium, walking toward her. "I saw your house as a problem to solve, not as someone's home, not as the place where you raised your family, where you shared a life with your husband, where you built your memories." Marlene's vision blurred with tears as the mayor extended his hand to her. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent square. "And I promise you, and everyone here, that we will do better. We're establishing a community board to review all future zoning changes, ensuring that we never forget the human element again." Sam squeezed her shoulder gently as Marlene reached out to shake the mayor's hand. The crowd erupted in applause, and several people wiped tears from their eyes. "Furthermore," the mayor continued, returning to the podium, "I'm announcing the creation of a community assistance fund. It will help residents like Mrs. Harris, who face unexpected hardships with their homes, because that's what real leadership should be about, helping our neighbors, not forcing them out." The bikers around Marlene cheered, their usual gruff demeanors softened by emotion. She saw Greg, her neighbor, nodding approvingly in the crowd. Even some of the town council members, who had initially supported the strict zoning laws, were smiling and applauding. As the mayor concluded his speech, people began approaching Marlene. Some offered hugs, others shared their own stories of struggling with home repairs. The square buzzed with conversation and laughter, feeling more like a community celebration than a formal gathering. "You did it, Marlene," Sam said quietly beside her. "You showed them what fighting for what's right looks like." Marlene shook her head, smiling through her tears. "We did it," she corrected him, looking around at all the faces. Bikers, neighbors, business owners, and yes, even the mayor, who had become part of her story. The whole town did it. She watched as the mayor mingled with the crowd, speaking earnestly with residents, listening to their concerns. It wasn't just her victory. It was a triumph for everyone who had ever felt powerless against unfair rules. The morning sun seemed brighter somehow, warming not just the town square, but the hearts of everyone gathered there. The late afternoon sun streamed through Marlene's newly repaired windows, casting warm, golden light across her freshly painted living room. The aroma of pot roast and apple pie filled every corner of her house. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the plates on her dining room table, not from age or worry this time, but from excitement. "Need any help with that, Marlene?" Sam's voice came from behind her. He'd arrived early, along with a few other bikers, to help set up. "Oh, Sam," she smiled, turning to face him. "Would you mind bringing out the extra chairs from the garage? I think we'll need them all tonight." The sound of motorcycles rumbling up her driveway made her heart swell. Through her window, she watched as members of the Silver Riders parked their bikes in neat rows. They carried covered dishes and paper bags filled with drinks and desserts. "Look at this spread," Betty from next door exclaimed as she walked in, holding a steaming casserole. "Marlene, your house looks absolutely beautiful." Marlene beamed with pride. The walls gleamed with fresh paint. The floors had been refinished, and new curtains hung in every window. But more than the physical changes, there was something else different about her home. It felt alive again. The bikers filed in, their leather vests a stark contrast to their warm smiles and gentle demeanors. Many carried food, everything from homemade chili to fresh-baked rolls. The dining room table quickly filled, and they had to set up 2 card tables to accommodate everyone. "Remember when we first pulled up here?" One of the bikers, Mike, chuckled as he set down a plate of brownies. "You looked like you thought we were about to rob you." Marlene laughed, remembering her initial fear. Well, who wouldn't be startled by 50 bikers showing up at their door? She patted Mike's arm. "But I've never been so glad to be wrong about something in my life." The house buzzed with conversation and laughter. Someone had brought a guitar, and soft music mixed with the clinking of plates and glasses. Marlene moved through her home, touching the solid walls, feeling the smooth finish of the new windowsills. Each repair held a story, a memory of someone's kindness. "Everyone," Sam called out, tapping his glass with a spoon. "Before we dig in, I think Marlene wants to say a few words." Marlene hadn't planned to speak, but as she looked around at the faces of these people who had become so dear to her, words came naturally. She began, her voice catching slightly. "When that storm hit, I thought I'd lost everything. My home was falling apart, and I felt so alone." The room grew quiet, faces turned toward her with understanding and affection. "But that storm," she continued, "it brought me all of you, and now, looking around this room, I realize something. Yes, you fixed my house, and it's beautiful. But more than that, you've given me a family." Several of the bikers nodded, a few wiping their eyes discreetly. Betty reached over and squeezed Marlene's hand. "So, thank you," Marlene said, gesturing to the feast before them. "Please, eat. There's plenty for everyone, and I want to hear every story you have to share." The room erupted in warm applause, followed by the happy chaos of plates being passed and conversations resuming. Marlene sat at the head of her table, watching as her guests, no, her family, filled their plates and shared stories. The sound of their laughter echoed off her strong new walls, and for the first time in years, her house truly felt like home again. The morning sun cast long shadows across Marlene's freshly painted porch as she stepped outside, wrapping her favorite cardigan around her shoulders. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the sweet scent of autumn leaves. She paused at the top step, taking in the sight of her restored home. Just months ago, she'd stood in this same spot, staring up at a torn roof and crumbling walls. Now, the house stood proud and strong, its new shingles gleaming in the morning light. The fresh coat of pale yellow paint brightened the whole property, making it look almost new again. Marlene's feet crunched on the gravel as she made her way around the side of the house. Her hand brushed against the sturdy siding, feeling the smooth texture beneath her fingertips. Each repaired section held a story of helping hands, of newfound friendships, of hope restored. The flower beds, which had been trampled during the construction work, were showing signs of recovery. Little green shoots pushed through the soil, promising future blooms. Marlene smiled, remembering how some of the bikers had helped her replant her beloved perennials, their tattooed arms carefully placing each plant in the ground. At the back of the house, she stopped to admire the new deck. It wasn't part of the original repair plan, but the community had insisted. A place for gatherings, they'd said. The wood was still fresh and unmarked, waiting for memories to be made. Her eyes welled up as she remembered the darkest days after the storm, the overwhelming despair, the certainty that she'd lose everything. The house had been more than just walls and a roof. It was her anchor, her connection to a lifetime of memories with her late husband. The thought of losing it had nearly broken her. But instead of breaking, she'd found strength she didn't know she had. The storm that had threatened to destroy her home had actually blown open the doors to a community she hadn't known existed. People she'd barely spoken to before had become as close as family. The sound of boots on gravel made her turn. Sam was walking toward her, his familiar leather vest catching the morning light. His presence had become so natural now, like he'd always been a part of her life. "Morning, Marlene," he called out, his voice warm and gentle. "Thought I might find you out here." She smiled, wiping away a stray tear. "Just taking it all in," she replied, gesturing to the house. "Sometimes I still can't believe it's real." Sam came to stand beside her, both of them gazing at the house. "It's more than real," he said softly. "It's a testament to what people can do when they come together." They walked side by side, making their way around to the front again. The morning was peaceful, broken only by the distant sound of birds and the occasional car passing by. It was a familiar routine they'd developed, these quiet morning walks, sharing comfortable silence and understanding. Marlene stopped at the corner of the house, touching the cornerstone that had been there since the day it was built. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I used to think this house was all I had left. Now I realize it gave me so much more than I ever expected." Sam nodded, understanding in his eyes. The journey had been difficult, filled with setbacks, tears, and moments of near defeat. But standing there in the morning light, beside her restored home and a true friend, Marlene knew with absolute certainty that every challenge had been worth it. They continued their walk in peaceful silence, the morning sun warming their shoulders, as Marlene's home stood strong behind them, a symbol of resilience, community, and renewed hope. The evening sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink as Marlene settled into her favorite rocking chair on the porch. The gentle creaking of wood beneath her was a familiar comfort, like an old friend welcoming her home. She wrapped her hands around a steaming mug of tea, breathing in the sweet aroma of chamomile and honey. Her eyes wandered over her property, taking in the sight of her restored home. The new roof gleamed in the fading sunlight, solid and secure. Fresh paint brightened the walls, and the repaired foundation stood strong. But it wasn't just the physical changes that made her heart swell. It was the memories of countless hands that had worked together to make this possible. A light breeze rustled through the leaves of the old oak tree in her front yard, carrying with it the distant rumble of motorcycles. The sound, once strange and intimidating, now brought a smile to her face. The Silver Riders were gathering for their final visit before heading out on their next mission of mercy. Sam's motorcycle led the group, its chrome fixtures catching the last rays of sunlight. He parked in her driveway, followed by dozens of other bikes, their engines quieting one by one. The familiar faces of her unlikely guardian angels emerged from behind their helmets, each wearing warm smiles that had become as familiar to her as family. "Evening, Marlene," Sam called out, climbing the porch steps. "Thought we'd stop by one last time before hitting the road." Marlene set her tea aside and stood, her eyes misty with emotion. "You've all done so much already." The other bikers gathered around the porch, their leather vests now bearing a small patch with a roof and hammer design, a memorial to their time helping Marlene. She noticed it and touched one gently, remembering the days of work, laughter, and growing friendship. "You know," she said, her voice soft but steady, "when that storm hit, I thought I'd lost everything. But now I realize it gave me something I'd been missing for years. A family." Sam nodded, understanding in his eyes. Sometimes the worst storms bring out the best in people. The group shared knowing looks, each remembering their own part in the journey. One of the bikers, a woman named Carol, stepped forward with a small wooden plaque. "We made this for you," she said, handing it to Marlene. The plaque read, "Home is where the heart finds strength." Below the words was a beautifully carved image of Marlene's cottage, surrounded by motorcycles. Marlene traced the carving with her fingers, feeling the smooth grooves of the wood. "It's perfect," she whispered. The sun was now barely visible on the horizon, casting long shadows across her lawn. The bikers began moving back to their motorcycles, knowing it was time to say goodbye. One by one, they hugged Marlene, each embrace carrying the weight of shared struggles and victories. Sam was the last to leave the porch. "You take care of yourself, Marlene. Remember, you're part of our family now." "And you're part of mine," she replied, squeezing his hand. The bikers mounted their motorcycles, engines roaring to life in a symphony that had become music to Marlene's ears. She watched as they formed their familiar formation, Sam leading the way. With a final wave, they began to roll forward, their chrome and leather catching the last glimpses of daylight. The rumble of engines gradually faded as the group disappeared down the road, leaving behind a trail of dust that glowed golden in the setting sun. Marlene remained on her porch, watching until the last bike vanished from view. The sky above was clear now, with the first stars beginning to twinkle. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Marlene's freshly painted porch as she put the finishing touches on the buffet table. The scent of her famous pot roast and apple pie wafted through the open windows, mixing with the crisp autumn air. Her hands trembled slightly as she straightened the checkered tablecloth, not from age or weakness, but from the overwhelming emotions bubbling up inside her. From the street came the familiar rumble of motorcycles, growing louder with each passing second. A smile spread across her face as the silver riders pulled up, their bikes gleaming in the golden light. Sam led the group, his weathered face breaking into a warm grin as he dismounted. "Something smells amazing, Marlene," he called out, making his way up the path. The other bikers followed, each carrying something: covered dishes, drinks, and even a few small gifts. "Well, I couldn't let you all leave without a proper thank you," Marlene replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Come on in, everyone. Make yourselves at home." The bikers filed into her house, her beautiful, strong, restored house. Their boots no longer echoed on weak floorboards, and the ceiling above stood solid and true. Every corner held memories of their collective effort, their unwavering support during her darkest hours. "Can't believe how different this place looks," one of the older bikers, Joe, remarked, running his hand along the fresh wallpaper. "Remember when we first showed up? That storm had done a number on it." "On me too," Marlene added softly, setting down a basket of warm rolls. "I was so lost back then, scared and alone." Sam stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "But you weren't alone for long, were you?" The room filled with the warmth of conversation and laughter as everyone settled in. Plates were filled, stories were shared, and memories of the past few months flowed freely. Marlene watched as these rough-looking bikers, who had become her family, joked and teased each other like siblings. "Remember when Tommy nearly fell through the roof?" someone called out, causing a burst of laughter. "Hey! I was testing its structural integrity," Tommy defended, grinning through his beard. As the evening progressed, Marlene found herself moving from group to group, soaking in their presence, their energy, their kindness. These people had given her so much more than just repairs to her home. They had rebuilt her faith in humanity, her sense of belonging. When the food had been enjoyed and the sky outside turned purple with dusk, Sam clinked his glass with a spoon. The room fell quiet, all eyes turning to him. "I think it's time for a toast," he announced, raising his glass. The others followed suit, standing in a circle that encompassed the living room. Marlene felt tears welling up in her eyes as she looked at their faces, faces that had become so dear to her. "To Marlene," Sam began, his voice carrying the weight of sincerity, "who taught us that sometimes the strongest people are the ones who learn to accept help. To this house, which brought us all together, and to the Silver Riders, who proved that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes It's about the people who show up when you need them most. Glasses clink together, the sound mixing with murmurs of agreement and a few sniffles, not all of them from Marlene. In that moment, standing in her restored home surrounded by these incredible people, Marlene felt complete. The storm that had threatened to destroy everything had instead brought her an unexpected gift: a new family, a renewed purpose, and the knowledge that she would never have to face life's challenges alone again. Sunlight streamed through Marlene's bedroom window, casting a warm glow across her face. She opened her eyes slowly, taking in the familiar sight of her room, the floral wallpaper she'd chosen years ago with her late husband, the sturdy dresser that had survived generations, and the newly repaired ceiling above her head. Everything felt different now, yet comfortingly the same. She sat up in bed, running her hands over the soft quilt. The house creaked gently, but it was no longer the sound of decay. Instead, it was the peaceful settling of a home that had been given new life. The faint scent of fresh paint and new wood still lingered in the air, a reminder of all the work that had gone into saving her beloved home. Marlene walked to her window and drew back the curtains fully. Outside, her garden bloomed with late summer flowers, the ones Sam and some of the other bikers had helped her plant after the repairs were finished. The sight brought a warm smile to her face as she remembered their rough hands carefully placing delicate seedlings into the soil. In her kitchen, she went through her morning routine with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. The coffee maker gurgled cheerfully as she prepared her breakfast. Everything in her home now told a story of community and friendship. From the new kitchen faucet donated by the local hardware store to the handcrafted shelf one of the bikers had built to hold her cookbooks. As she sipped her coffee, Marlene's eyes fell on the collection of photographs on her wall. Among the old family photos, there were new additions: pictures from the day the bikers first arrived, snapshots of the renovation work, and her favorite, a group photo taken at the fundraiser. She'd been so hesitant to be in that picture, but now she was glad Sam had insisted. The joy on everyone's faces captured exactly what this journey had meant. The morning light caught the newly polished hardwood floors, making them gleam. These floors had seen decades of life: children running, holiday gatherings, quiet evenings with her husband. Now they would see new memories, new friendships, new joy. The thought filled her heart with gratitude. Moving through her home, Marlene straightened a few pictures and adjusted a curtain. Each room felt alive with possibility. The old grandfather clock in the hallway, recently repaired by one of the bikers who turned out to be a skilled clockmaker, ticked steadily, marking time in a house that was no longer just surviving but thriving. She paused at her front door, her hand resting on the new doorknob. Through the window, she could see her porch. The same porch where she'd first met the bikers, where she'd shared countless cups of coffee with Sam, where she'd learned that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as challenges. The morning air called to her, fresh and full of promise. Marlene straightened her shoulders, feeling the strength that had always been within her, now reinforced by the knowledge that she wasn't alone. Her home was more than just a building now. It was a testament to the power of community, to the strength of friendship, to the miracle of people coming together to help someone in need. With a deep breath, she opened her door and stepped out onto her porch. The future stretched before her, bright and full of possibility. She was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that her new family, her wonderful, unexpected family of bikers, neighbors, and friends, would be right there with her.